When you tell one of your stories to one of your clients, it's critical that you second position, that you empathize, that you project into them and imagine what it's like to be them hearing your story rather than just you telling your story the way that you want to tell it. In a normal, everyday, you telling your story to someone else, like you might go hang out with some friends and say, oh my gosh, let me tell you what happened to me yesterday, or let me tell you a story about this experience that I had. That kind of storytelling is not the kind of storytelling that I'm talking about here. That kind of storytelling is what I would typically call processing your story. So when you're processing your story, you're not conscious of the other person's listening of your story. You're not conscious of how it's occurring to them. You're just telling your story for kind of the joy of telling your story and having the attention and being heard and so forth. When you're telling your story or one of your stories in the sense that I'm talking about right now, you're not just telling it to process it. And in fact, when you're telling your story to process it, you're taking from your listener and you're putting a burden on them. It's actually a cost to them to hear your story when you're just processing your story. Now, most of us haven't made this set of distinctions yet, but it's a critical set of distinctions to make. Okay. So the kind of story that I'm talking about here is when you share a lesson that you have already processed, you've already worked through, and then you've thought about which elements of the story are going to be useful to the person that's listening. And then how can I refine it and kind of, shine it up so that it's maximally attention grabbing, but also really valuable at the same time. I'll give you an example. So when I taught dating advice, a story that I used to share regularly was a story about how I went out one night and I saw an attractive woman that I wanted to talk to. And I started to get really nervous. And I started to get this feeling inside of me, like I wanted to go over and talk to her, but I also wanted to run away at the same time, right? I wanted to go talk to her, but I wanted to run away, and I wanted to go talk to her and run away. And then I just got more and more nervous, and I finally just left and then kicked myself for days afterwards thinking, what did you have to lose? I mean, why didn't you just go at least say, anything to her there? Okay. Okay. Now notice when I said that story, I wasn't processing the story. There's a difference, right? So if, let's say that would have happened to me, 25 years ago or whenever it did happen to me. And then I went to hang out with my best friend and I wanted to tell him about it. The way I would have told him, what I would have said to him is I would have said, hey man, I saw this really attractive woman last night and dude, I just got so nervous and I lost it, and I just couldn't do it. And I walked away and I've just been beating myself up ever since. And it would have some of that emotion in there where I would still be in it, if that makes sense. I'd still be consumed with it. It would still be bothering me. And you could feel the heaviness in my relaying of the story. Okay. Who's with me on this one? You know what I'm talking about here. You got it. Okay. Okay. So do you have the distinction here? Sharing a story that's been processed already by you, that you've then formatted up so that it would be really valuable for your audience to hear, versus a story that you're telling to process the story and kind of be heard. I'll give another distinction here, which is when you have an experience in life, especially when it's a really intense one, it's usually very hard to have any experience other than the one you're having. It's hard to be empathizing with other people and thinking about what's going on for other people. And whereas after the stories or after the experience is finished, when you're going back through the story, when you're processing, when you process the story, if it was intense, and you need to kind of process it and tell it to process it. When you're doing that, you're still usually kind of not able to get outside yourself, because you're still, right, it's still real for you. It's still really happening, and it's very engulfing. But then if you tell the story a few times, you think about the story a little bit, you start to imagine what it was like for other people, which parts they can relate to, which parts they can't. And then you start kind of sculpting it and telling it a few different ways. There becomes a time where you can tell your story, you can fully associate into the story, but you're not stuck in your experience and your emotional, the charge isn't there anymore, but you can still totally embody it. You can be there, but you can also, as you're telling the story at any time, you can hop around from your perspective to the other person's perspective. Like when I first had that experience, or let's say the next day I was talking to my friend about that experience of seeing a woman I wanted to talk to, and I got too nervous and I walked away. I would never have had the presence of mind to then say, here's what it was probably like for her, because I would be too stuck in my experience of it. Whereas now, or, after I thought through which story would be valuable, and I thought about how to say it to my audience so that it would be valuable to them, I can totally do it. I can totally tell that story right now. And then at any point in the story, stop and say, now, let's imagine what it's like from that woman's perspective. She may have seen me across the room, but doesn't even know that I exist. Probably doesn't even know that I'm interested in her or that I'm thinking about her. So think about how different these two experiences are. I'm having multiple days of my life that are consumed by this. She maybe glanced over and saw me, and she went right on with her life. And I'm not even a flicker in her memory. So yes, and so this is a total yes and, Deb. That's a great point you're making right there. Is when you tell your story, if you can get back into it and you can experience it, it makes it a lot more compelling, but we also want to craft it, and we want to get it to the point where we can tell it and we can be in it, even crying or, expressing what was happening for us, and then stop for a second and meta comment on the story, or talk about what was going on for other people, or then bring it back and say, now here's what that means to you. There's another thing about this story that I shared, of seeing an attractive woman, for example, and not being able to talk to her. Or another story that you hear me share pretty often is when I first started doing sales and marketing, and I talk about running ads that didn't work, or sending out postcards that didn't work, and or sitting down at the phone to make cold calls, and getting so upset that I just went home and went to bed. And I tell these stories because they really happened to me in my life. They were, super impactful. But I tell them because I also think that they align with the experience of the listener. That there isn't anything that I'm saying that my prospective client cannot relate to and identify with, and that's not going to pull them in. So, for example, I'm not going to tell the story of seeing an attractive woman and then getting nervous and walking away and kicking myself for multiple days. I'm not going to tell that story if I'm teaching a course about, let's say, productivity, because that's not relevant to someone who wants to be more productive. Yeah. I'm not going to tell the marketing story of running an ad and it didn't work when I'm trying to, sell a dating course at the end, because they're not relevant to each other. There's going to be a lot of disconnects there. Okay. So on the other hand, if let's say I am offering a marketing course, and let's say that I've created a webinar that's an hour long or 90 minutes long or something, and I'm teaching this webinar, and I'm teaching some of the most valuable lessons that I've learned about marketing. And then at the end, I'm going to make an offer to sell a course. If I tell the story of starting out in marketing and running an ad and it not working, no one calling me on it, and then sending postcards out in the mail and having no one call me on these things, and handing out flyers and having no one call me. If I tell these stories, I've learned that these really, they connect with someone who wants to learn marketing, because they fear running an ad and not having anyone call, right? They fear spending a bunch of time, effort, energy, money on a marketing campaign, and then nothing happens. So when they hear this, they say, I want to know how this story ends, because, you know, you lived the thing that I am fearing. Does that make sense? Right? If I'm talking to a socially awkward man who doesn't know what to say to a woman, and I tell a compelling story about seeing an attractive woman, getting nervous, wanting to talk to her, like, he's right on edge, because I'm literally speaking into his experience. And then if I say I walked away and I kicked myself and, you know, so forth, there's something in here that suggests that somewhere later in this story, I'm going to tell another version of this, but I'm going to have gotten the woman's phone number, or gotten a date, or gotten a girlfriend, or something like that. And of course, I'm going to need to tell a story about how it succeeded as well. All right. So I've found that the most compelling stories go something like this. Okay. I tried something and I failed. Okay. And in fact, here, let's get our whiteboard going here. Okay, so I'm going to give a little simplified version of this here. So I tried and failed. Okay, so this is, I ran an advertisement. I took the time, effort, energy to lay the ad out and run it. And I spent, you know, $200 or $300 on it, and no one called. Right? Or I walked over to a woman and I started a conversation and she rejected me, or she wasn't interested. Or I started an exercise routine and it just made me tired, made things worse. Or I went on a diet and I gained weight. Got it? So I tried something and I failed. Now, if the thing that you tried really lines up with what your audience is trying, that's great, because now you're living in the same world as them, right? You're building a lot of rapport. You're connecting with them. All right. So tried and failed. If you tried and failed multiple times, that to me is even more interesting. Okay. So in other words, if you say, I tried the keto diet and, you know, I gained 10 pounds. I tried the South Beach diet and I couldn't get up in the morning. You know, I tried the, you know, high fat paleo diet and my skin just broke out. That's even more interesting, because now what you're saying is you're serious. You're determined. You're a disciplined person. You're going to keep trying, and you were willing to try these things, and you just tried and they all failed. Does that make sense, everybody? I tried this thing and it failed. It's also kind of, you got to be kind of, you know, powerful to say out loud, I tried something and it failed. Most people are not getting on Instagram or social media or whatever and turning on the camera and saying, hey, everyone, I want to tell you the story about how I learned how to do this thing. Step one was I tried this and I failed, and I was embarrassed, or I gained weight, or I looked bad. Most people are not doing that. Why? Because they're trying to look good. Yeah. But I'll suggest to you that you look even better if you're willing to look bad and you're willing to share. Right? Now, you don't want to process that you looked bad. Okay. You don't want to get on, you know, Instagram and say, hi, you know, I want to tell you about, you know, how I figured out this diet. Well, first, you know, I tried the paleo diet and I gained all this weight and now I'm depressed and I think life isn't working out for me and I'm feeling suicidal right now. And like, that's not going to build your credibility. Okay. So it's not that. Okay. So I tried and failed. Then, I like to, I'll do a little bit longer version of this, but then I like to have that I had an insight. Okay, so I learned something. And then I had a breakthrough. Okay. And we could even kind of put these things together. You know, it's kind of insight, breakthrough. So in this case, I tried and failed. I ran ads and did direct mail and did all this stuff and nothing worked. And then I went to a seminar and I learned about this thing called direct response marketing, where instead of talking about me in the ad, I would talk about them and I would offer them something valuable that they could get for free. So I had this insight, and then I went and ran another ad, and instead of getting 0 calls, I got dozens of calls. Got it? So I had an insight. I learned something with the dating stuff. I started making friends with guys that were really good with flirting and attraction. And I had this, when I was watching them, I had this massive insight, which was, I'm always kind of apologizing for myself and saying to women, like, please like me. Will you like me if I take you to dinner? That was my kind of stance. And the guys who were the most successful were like teasing women and making fun of them. And they would walk up to an attractive woman and like tease her about her clothing. And I would be like, that's totally against the rules. That's impossible. And then, they would get her phone number. They'd, go out on a date. So this, how you learned the insight, I think is super, super important, or where the insight is. And then that you went and you used the insight and you had a breakthrough, right? You had a breakthrough and it started to work. So for me, I had the breakthrough. The phone started ringing off the hook. I got like dozens of calls on this direct response ad, whereas none of the other stuff worked. It's a total revelation. Yeah. So there's an insight, then there's a breakthrough. And what you really want to talk about here is the breakthrough, and I'm going to just put in parentheses here, the result. It's not R like registered trademark or anything, but you really want to talk about the result that you got when you had the breakthrough. So if you tried 7 diets and none of them worked, and 3 of them caused you to gain weight and 2 of them made you sick, and then you tried one and everything just worked for you. You felt full when you ate the food, you had energy, you started losing weight, it just worked for your system. And you realized that, somehow you had this insight, oh, I've been thinking about this all wrong. And then I lost weight. I lost 27 pounds in 90 days. And here's the before picture and here's the after picture. Massively compelling when you talk about that breakthrough. Okay. So then I created a system. I took what I learned and I made a system. Okay. And for extra credit, I showed that system to other people and they started getting good results with it. So for example, with my dating advice stuff, I was learning about dating for a few years, and I had gotten this great girlfriend. And one night I was sick, actually, and my friends were going out, and I just stayed home and I sat down at my computer. I'm like, well, I'm sick, but I don't want to waste the time. So I wrote down everything I'd learned about dating. And I think it was like 10 or 12 pages. I just kind of summarized all the stuff that I had learned from my journals and everything over the last few years. And I sent it to a friend, had an online newsletter list, and I published it. Just kind of wanted to make a contribution to other guys who were interested in this. And it blew up. It's like people started talking about it all over the place. Guys started writing, they were getting great results. I printed out my little 12-page thing and I started giving it to some of my male friends, and they started using it and they're like, dude, this stuff works. This is really good. Okay. So I created a system and I showed it to others, and then they started getting results. Does this make sense, everyone? Created a system. I showed it to other people and they started getting results. So let's say you help couples, who are in conflict with each other. Maybe you tried and failed and got in fights with your romantic partners and broke up. Then you had a big insight. Then you had a breakthrough. And then now you have much, better conflicts with your partner because now you understand this thing. Then you created a system and you started showing it to other couples and they started having less conflict. And one couple fell in love and got married, and then they said this, and yeah. So do you see how the progression works here, everyone? Yeah. And then the final step is, now I want to show you. Right? So the final step is, now I want to teach this to you and help you get those results. And that's the offer, basically. This kind of stack, this way of framing and positioning your life, your experience, and so forth. This, if it's done right, it builds a huge amount of rapport, and it quickly helps to kind of establish you as a credible leader. Because if you're sharing in a way that the other person is learning, they're going to be right with you. You're going to be building a lot of rapport, a lot of trust. You always want to write or speak or teach in a way where whoever's listening feels like they're learning something at each step. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to condense, decades, at least years or decades into several minutes. Right? You're trying to say to the other person, hey, other person who is where I was, I know where you are right now, and I'm going to prove it by telling you where I was in my life. Here, I tried these things and they didn't work. And then I had an insight. I learned something really important here. Let me tell you what that was. And then I had a breakthrough. All of a sudden, my results, everything started working better. I created a system, showed it to some other people, started working for them. And, I'm really passionate about this thing. I care about this, and I like helping other people to get better results. And now I want to show it to you. I want to show you how this thing works. I want to give you this system and these tools so that you can get the results that you really want here.